I heard that Ryan Reynolds wrote a scene for the film. Is that true?
Yeah, look, I think that I'm pretty sure that everybody at some point wrote something for the film. And yeah, Ryan, Blake, I was just so grateful that there's so many collective heads going in to try to make something so beautiful.
Do you remember which scene?
He wrote on a few scenes, I believe, and suggested a lot of things that made the movie better. I mean, the guy's a creative genius, and they work so well together.
Well, she told me Taylor Swift helped her get the role, like signed off on her audition.
I was casting, and I had actually brought in and showed her casting tape to Blake and Taylor, and they were both like, yes, her. And that's a true story.
It began as a Hollywood dream team. Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, America's charismatic power couple, taking center stage in a major adaptation of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel, It Ends With Us. But behind the curtain of red carpets, press tours, and glitzy photo ops, a storm was brewing. One of legal documents, fractured friendships, and a web of conflicting statements that now threatens to unravel the carefully constructed narrative of the film's production. At the heart of it all is a question far weightier than any celebrity gossip column might hint at. What really happened, and who is telling the truth? This is Sophia, and welcome to my channel, Smart Spill. The center of this legal maelstrom is a lawsuit quietly dubbed Ban's Sham, where allegations swirl not just of civil disputes, but of calculated deceit. At first glance, the details seem typical of a contractual squabble in Hollywood, but dig deeper, and the accusations begin to snowball. Subpoenas allegedly issued through a lawsuit with no clear defendants. An iPhone extracted forensically without apparent consent. Accusations of false imprisonment. Legal teams pointing fingers and key players seemingly sidestepping accountability. Wayfair, a production company tied to the film, has insisted that evidence central to the case was retrieved via lawful subpoenas. They state that the legal paths they followed were legitimate. But Wayfair's version of events stands in stark contrast to what other parties are now alleging. Blake Lively, despite multiple public assertions through her legal team about the legitimacy of the subpoena that allegedly extracted data from former employee Jen Abel's phone, has failed to provide any official copy of that subpoena. And this omission has not gone unnoticed. In a lawsuit where discovery has only just begun, Wayfair is still waiting for documentation that should, by all rights, have been handed over months ago. Even more curious is the leaked subpoena. Published by Deadline and the Daily Mail, it named Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and their affiliated companies. The subpoena reportedly requested any and all electronic records, data, documents, and communications collected from a specific cell phone from December 2022 onward, but failed to name who the phone actually belonged to. The speculation that it may have been Jen Abel's phone is strengthened by her legal team's reaction, but still, the subpoena itself remains in the shadows. Stephanie Jones, whose company allegedly facilitated this data extraction, is caught in the crossfire. Her legal representative has argued that the subpoena's purpose and the crime fraud exception being invoked by Wayfair are fundamentally flawed. Jones's attorney contends that the Wayfair team has not provided any factual basis to establish that any crime or fraud occurred, let alone one significant enough to override attorney-client privilege. Their argument cuts deep, that complaints are not evidence, and that no concrete proof has been offered to show wrongdoing. They dismiss the allegations as wild speculation and claim Jones's actions, retrieving data from a company-issued phone, were entirely above board. Furthermore, they say the supposedly damaging data came from the physical storage of the device, not the cloud or any personal accounts, a key distinction in privacy litigation. Still, the timing of events and absence of transparency raise questions. If there is nothing to hide, Wayfair counters, then why not simply produce the subpoena? Why delay document production with procedural diversions? Why downplay public admissions, like those from legal representatives who openly stated the subpoena came from a DOE lawsuit, a kind of anonymous lawsuit often used in internet defamation cases, and that it was standard practice? The implications grow deeper when media interviews are considered. Attorneys close to Lively have described their actions as conscientious and thorough investigation. They admit to using common tools like DOE lawsuits and subpoenas to uncover identities behind unlawful activities. But those very tools now face intense scrutiny. Was this common practice used to obtain confidential data under false pretenses? As subpoenas fly, one name keeps reappearing: Taylor Swift. According to multiple sources, Taylor was dragged into this mess through her perceived involvement in the film and her friendship with Lively. Publicly, Lively claimed Taylor had a hand in casting decisions. Some sources even allege Taylor helped approve casting tapes or influenced behind-the-scenes decisions, such as composer selection and editing cuts. But now, Taylor Swift's legal team has filed a motion to quash a subpoena from Wayfair that seeks to explore her attorney's communications with Blake and Ryan's lawyers. Taylor's attorneys, in their motion, emphasize that they take no position on the lawsuit or the allegations. They deny involvement in the film's creative decisions and challenge the relevance of the discovery request. This neutrality strikes a stark contrast to what Lively previously suggested about Taylor's role. Was Taylor actually unaware that her name was being used to push through creative decisions? Or is she distancing herself now that litigation is heating up? The implications here are potentially damning. If Lively exaggerated Taylor's involvement to sway decisions within the film, firing a composer, changing editors, altering production timelines, it wouldn't just call her credibility into question, but also the ethical grounds on which those decisions were made. In the court of law and public opinion, such misrepresentations could shift the narrative entirely. And while Taylor's attorneys argue that they're uninvolved, the subpoenas paint a different picture. Wayfair is seeking all communications between Taylor's counsel and the Lively Reynolds camp regarding the film and this lawsuit. The focus isn't just on whether Taylor was creatively involved, but whether her identity was leveraged without consent. Were Blake and her team invoking Taylor's influence to sway outcomes? Were false statements made under the pretense of Swift's authority? Wayfair wants answers, and they're using every legal tool available to get them. Meanwhile, another front in the legal war opens: financial disclosures. Lively's team accused Wayfair of stonewalling on document production, but Wayfair's response is swift and biting. They argue that Lively herself has not produced a single document, no evidence of how she collected materials, no transparency on her own damages, and her request for financial records, including the liquidation of assets in 2024 and 2025, is, according to Wayfair, unjustified. There's a larger strategy at play here. While Lively's team pushes motions that seem aimed at gathering headline-worthy material, Wayfair frames her as unwilling to engage in discovery in good faith. The judges now face a tangle of conflicting filings: motions to quash, motions to compel, accusations of gaslighting and hypocrisy. And through it all, the question looms: is this a legitimate pursuit of justice or a battle to control the narrative? This saga is far from over. The truths being fought over in court could change reputations, careers, and even how power is wielded in Hollywood. What began as a collaboration between friends and creative minds may now serve as a cautionary tale for how quickly alliances fracture when secrets, legal leverage, and conflicting stories collide. In the months following the initial eruptions of legal hostilities, the courtroom chess match has evolved into something more intricate. No longer merely a skirmish over discovery rights or disputed subpoenas, but a full-blown confrontation over credibility, motive, and influence. The parties are now battling on multiple fronts, with each move triggering strategic countermaneuvers designed not just to win in court, but to shape the narrative outside of it. At the center of this unfolding legal theater are key figures whose reputations are increasingly at stake. Not least among them, Stephanie Jones, whose shifting role has become both a shield and a target. After the contested subpoena that ignited the firestorm, reportedly issued in a lawsuit with no named defendants and handed over to Blake Lively's legal team, Wayfair's counter efforts intensified. While Jones's attorneys claimed there was nothing improper in the data extraction process, Wayfair pressed the court to consider whether a lawful mechanism had been exploited to accomplish something ethically questionable: obtaining sensitive data without the awareness or consent of the person from whom it was taken. In a significant twist, Wayfair's legal strategy evolved. They began threading together a pattern, not just of procedural errors or non-compliance, but of deliberate misrepresentation. One of their key aims became clear: to expose a larger effort to obscure the real source and intent of the subpoena, and whether Blake Lively's team, perhaps with the implicit cooperation of Jones' works, had orchestrated a maneuver to bypass traditional discovery processes. It wasn't only about the document. It was about whether the mechanism used to get it had been misused under the guise of legitimacy. And the pressure mounted, particularly as Taylor Swift's legal representatives remained resolute in their detachment. With Taylor's attorneys now caught in the crosshairs of a broader inquiry, targeted not for their actions, but for the mere possibility that their communications had been invoked as a prop in the larger narrative, Wayfair's requests took on a dual purpose. They sought to clarify the boundary between actual collaboration and fabricated endorsement. What mattered now wasn't just what Taylor knew or didn't do, it was what others claimed on her behalf. In that context, Taylor's attorney's motion to quash wasn't just a legal move, it was a reputational defense. Their insistence that they held no position in the lawsuit was less about neutrality and more about insulation, an attempt to erect a legal firewall that would prevent Taylor's image from being pulled into the maelstrom Blake was rapidly becoming the face of. Whether or not Taylor's name appeared in discovery filings, her silence became louder than any statement, adding to the public's curiosity and to Wayfair's urgency. Behind the scenes, tensions escalated over discovery obligations and the internal mechanics of legal compliance. Wayfair accused Blake Lively's legal team of delaying tactics, noting that while public accusations about financial harm were mounting, the documents that would support those claims were nowhere to be seen. More importantly, Lively had failed to provide a clear explanation of how her legal team had searched for relevant material. No audit trail, no metadata, no transparency. As discovery deadlines loomed, the two sides clashed over more than just documents. Lively's legal representatives insisted that her financial privacy be preserved and pushed back hard against the disclosure of tax returns, arguing that such invasive requests lacked justification. But Wayfair countered that it wasn't about net worth, it was about causality. If Blake was claiming she lost business, film opportunities, or faced reputational harm, then how could those claims be evaluated without actual documentation? Still, even those arguments paled in comparison to the implications of another subtle but potent theme emerging in the filings: who truly held control over the production of It Ends With Us. Wayfair's legal team, piece by piece, began constructing a portrayal of the film's management that pointed to an aggressive internal takeover, where Lively and Reynolds, using both their public stature and strategic legal tools, began reshaping the production's hierarchy from the inside. Casting shifts, music licensing choices, editing preferences, each became a potential puzzle piece, not because they were inherently illegal, but because they suggested influence that had been denied or minimized under oath. It was within this framework that Stephanie Jones's role continued to morph. On one hand, her attorneys claimed she was a bystander caught in the legal crosshairs, an executive following standard protocol. On the other, Wayfair implied that she may have been more deeply involved in facilitating the contested subpoena, including the choice to withhold critical information about whose data was being accessed. Her denials were methodical, but Wayfair's questions kept circling the same axis. If Jones had no direct interest in the lawsuit, and if she was not legally obligated to provide the data she did, what exactly motivated her to cooperate so extensively? Even Kristen Taylor, Jones's attorney, became a figure of scrutiny. Her filings took a defensive tone, oscillating between procedural objections and rhetorical flourishes meant to distance Jones from Lively's broader legal approach. But her arguments left cracks, uncertainties about whether she fully understood how the subpoena had been used or what data had been acquired. Repeatedly, she fell back on the idea that there was no evidence of wrongdoing, an assertion that, while technically valid in a courtroom, only served to sharpen Wayfair's underlying narrative. If there's nothing to hide, why the evasions? Adding fuel to the fire, Wayfair submitted late-night filings accusing Blake's team of media manipulation. In their eyes, the motion to compel financial disclosures was never about getting the information. It was about generating press coverage. Public perception, they argued, was being weaponized through legal filings meant more for headlines than hearings. It was a blistering accusation, one that suggested the lawsuit had become as much about narrative warfare as about justice. As these dynamics played out in real time, the entire case took on a surreal quality. Hollywood's usual opacity was now lit up under the harsh fluorescence of federal filings. The glitter was gone. In its place stood competing allegations, sealed depositions, and discovery disputes over who knew what, when, and why. Even as the attorneys tried to keep things clinical and procedural, the underlying stakes were deeply personal. Because behind every filing, every subpoena, every motion to quash was a question of trust, not just in the courtroom, but in the relationships that had once seemed unshakable. Blake Lively and Taylor Swift had publicly been allies, their friendship a staple of entertainment coverage. But in the context of this litigation, that friendship now appeared to have blurred into fiction, a narrative constructed for convenience. If Blake had indeed invoked Taylor's name to make professional gains, without consent or exaggerating involvement, then even private loyalty couldn't shield that choice from public consequence. In the end, the court may determine the boundaries of legality in this case. But the more elusive truth, the one that will echo far beyond discovery deadlines and sealed transcripts, is who the public believes. And in an industry where perception often outweighs evidence, that might be the most consequential verdict of all.